Hey guys, it's Mrs. Wallace. I hope you guys are doing okay. I really miss you guys. But I did want to do a little short video just to kind of segue between some of the things we started to talk about in class with Europe in the Indian Ocean basin and how the European countries generally move to the Atlantic. This becomes a really big turning point in world history. We see a great deal of additional colonialism and a lot of consequences around the world because of heightened prosperity in some cases, but also a lot of humanitarian issues. So, we see that on some scale in the Indian Ocean basin. So I just wanted to kind of note that and then maybe get you guys interested a little bit in the role of Christopher Columbus and some of what happens into the 1500s with some of the expeditions. Okay, so first of all, we're looking at a map, and I know we looked at this in class, so this is kind of just a reminder. We're really seeing some of the effects in the Indian Ocean of three European societies. One is Portugal, which you see in the gold, and in terms of colonial flag, kind of putting down, we see a lot in Eastern Africa and also in Western Africa, especially in like modern day Ghana. There's a variety of different frameworks in which this happens, right? It's something important to note that the Portuguese do not sail just once. It's not just Vasco da Gama in 1498. There's a series of different armadas that leave from Portugal. Most of them are state funded, and as they continue, they become more aggressive and generally more likely to incite some type of violence. We see a lot of conflict because there's already heavy competition in the Indian Ocean when the Portuguese enter. So you have Arab traders, for example, people who are, when Portugal lands in Calicut, there are Hindu merchants, there are Arab merchants, and a great deal of kind of concern when Portugal lands that there's going to be a pushing out of some of those original trading groups. So a lot of this is about the degree of competition that's still going to exist and, how much room there is for additional competition. What the Portuguese do, and this becomes really significant just in terms of a model, is this trading post empire, and we really see in every single spot where you see a square, right? So in Zanzibar or Mombasa, Bombay, Goa, Cochin in India, all of these places become Portuguese trading posts, and the trading posts are controlled places. Others cannot trade there unless they carry a piece of paper known as a cartaz, and that really gives them the right to trade, and they have to purchase it from Portugal. So Portugal's in the business of kind of controlling a great deal of the trade, but it's on, to some degree, some limited scale because it's really limited to these spaces where there's actual trading posts. And these are not built simultaneously. They're built over time, in some cases through conflict, in some cases through contracts and agreement and what we would call like win-win situations. There's incentives, in many places on a variety of sides. Okay, we do see the Portuguese in the area of Malacca. So note that on this map, Malacca and the area of Indonesia is going to appear to be Dutch, right? But Dutch control really follows the Portuguese. So another kind of big takeaway from this is that the European powers are going to start to duke it out in the Indian Ocean based on where they see the greatest, kind of bang for their buck. And some of the control over the Spice Islands becomes really key. And we see the Dutch on this map in, significant places like Indonesia, Batavia, it becomes their the kind of headquarters in a sense. And we also see the Spanish in the Philippines. Okay, so kind of have that map in mind as we look at the rest of this. I know, again, we looked at some of this in class, so I don't want to repeat stuff, but I just wanted to take you a little bit further, and different classes were in different places. We know that this Portuguese trading post empire, there's a couple of things about it. These are fortified trading posts and bases. This means that the Portuguese are using gunpowder. They have fortified ships, so they have the advantage of gunpowder. One of the key people would be, of course, Vasco da Gama, who sails on several occasions to Calicut. Even within the Society of India, there are competitions between various places. So between Cochin, for example, and Calicut, and Portugal gets involved in some of those local disputes. So there's competition, there's conflict, between some places where the Portuguese are landing, and they're getting involved in some of those conflicts. And we see Vasco da Gama entering in some of those conflicts, and also Albuquerque. There's a few other, Alfonso de Albuquerque is another Portuguese leader who's really significant in terms of making some decisions. We do see Portugal for a short amount of time control about half of the spice trade, and a lot of that comes through the control of the region around Indonesia, but that becomes very, very limited, right? There are rising Asian states. There are a great deal of successful efforts that Asian societies are going to push Portugal back, where they have trading posts and then they no longer do. And they also do face a great deal of European competition from the Dutch, from the English. By the time the English are in the Indian Ocean, Portugal is really no more. And one of the things that Portugal is really going to make money off of in the long run will be transportation, carrying Asian goods to Asian ports. They will become kind of the shippers, in a sense, the FedEx of the Indian Ocean, something that Arab traders were doing for some time. Spain and the Philippines, this becomes a really significant model because we do see kind of colonialism take place. This is a political system and economic system, rule by Spain. The land is acquired by Ferdinand Magellan, and this is happening, in the mid 1500s. So, it's important to have the context that Spain is already, by the end of the 1400s, putting down its flag in areas of the Americas, okay? And that includes the islands like nearby, today, modern day, Dominican Republic and Haiti and Cuba, and then also into South America. So Hernando Cortez, and kind of what we'll look at as the overrule of the Aztecs and the political system that develops in the region of the Aztecs, and also the Inca in South America. Those particular societies are developing simultaneously. So Spain and the Philippines is not like an isolated kind of land claim, right? But because of Ferdinand Magellan and his efforts to circumnavigate the globe, Spain acquires the Philippines. And as a model, this becomes significant because we do see forced labor. There's a great deal of Filipinos who are forced to work for the Spanish. We also see a great deal of religious conversion. So in addition to political control and economic control, there's a great deal of social change that happens within the Philippines, and this is happening in different parts of the Philippines to differing degrees. The Spanish bring in, to some degree, kind of a centralized government system that is very dependent on Spain, and Spain will heavily use the Philippines as a trading base, and the Philippines becomes kind of an in-between South America and some of the silver that's coming from there and the goods in China. And so there's a great deal of economic activity happening in the Philippines with Spanish ships, landing and departing, okay? And, there are some really, really key humanitarian issues. In one case, you have lots and lots of migration of merchants from China and Japan, notably. This creates a great deal of issues in terms of segregation and conflicts between ethnic groups in the islands of the Philippines. We also have some religious diversity in the Philippines. The southern part of the Philippines is predominantly Muslim and had been predominantly Muslim and resists a great deal of Spanish Catholicism. And there are some horrific humanitarian crises with marginalized populations. As Spain looks to use the land, a lot of that becomes people are exposed to massacres and some horrific types of humanitarian crises. We also see the British and the Dutch, and this becomes a little bit significant in terms of the scale, where Portugal is a small society and Portugal and Spain were kind of competing with each other. And there is a time actually where Spain actually acquires Portugal. So one of the things that leads to the winding down of Portugal in the Indian Ocean is essentially it becomes part of Spain, and Spain and the Dutch are going to go toe-to-toe. For a while, the Spanish controlled the Netherlands, and so, the Dutch see themselves as independent from Spain, and they become, adversaries. And so there's a lot of dynamics between the European countries and a great deal of fighting between European countries, and some of that fighting is also taking place, in the seas and, over these colonial, entities. But one of the things that we see in terms of a model that's very different with the Dutch had already been getting very wealthy, and for a couple of reasons. One is a lot of the spice that was going back to Portugal through the trading post empire had to then get sold to the rest of Europe. And Portugal's kind of far away from the rest of Europe, and they were looking for partners to help with this trade, and the Netherlands was kind of well placed. And so we see kind of merchants in the Netherlands making out from reselling Portuguese spices that are coming from the Indian Ocean. And there's a great deal of wealth that's starting to develop in that region of the Netherlands. And there's also a great deal of investment. We know from the crash course video, there's a lot of investment. That investment is because there's needs to make the land more suitable for farming. There's kind of this swampy, nature to the Netherlands. A lot of it is under sea level. So there is an effort to try to, make the land more suitable for farming, right? And try to add essentially to the land. And you can see this happening in this time period. A lot of that capital that was going to those projects was raised through joint stock companies. And we see that same model with the VOC. And in Britain too, there will be also a joint stock company. It just takes a while for that joint stock company to take off. So the VOC is very, very dominant, okay? But the trading that happens with these corporations becomes very, very significant. One is they are so richly invested that they can purchase a great deal of ships, and they have like the scale of ships that's massive. So the VOC in a place like Indonesia has such extreme, scale. The ability of taking over the Portuguese is very, very easy for the Dutch to do. There's also charters giving the VOC a great deal of power, right? They have the power to make war. They have the power to, land and claim land. There's a great deal of power to govern. So these corporations are kind of military organizations to a degree that are supported by the state. They have an incredible amount of power, and they also are heightened by this nature of individuals investing in them. So the profit, motive, people looking just to make a little bit of money for themselves have an incentive to kind of, add to the VOC and get some money back. And the money back was very significant. So the more word gets out that this is a money-making opportunity, more people start to invest, and the VOC becomes really, really powerful. The Dutch really in Indonesia will use a great deal of tactics. There is conflict, there is enslavement, there is impoverishing of the natives. You can really largely say that the Dutch look to Indonesia to kind of control the spice trade. They make decisions about how much nutmeg, where the nutmeg goes, and the indigenous population is really heavily affected by this. So, crimes of, against humanity, genocide, those types of things do occur. And there's also a great deal of extension. The Dutch will not only kind of employ some of their tactics in Indonesia, they're also going to make arrangements with other societies. The Dutch acquire some space in an island area off the coast of Tokugawa, Japan. This becomes a unique opportunity to trade with Japan. They're one of the few societies that do so at this time. Japan kind of remains closed to a great deal of foreign intervention. And, notably, the Dutch, which are Protestant, they had been part of the Protestant Reformation, are notably not Roman Catholic, and they do not seek to spread their religion. They do not seek to settle. So this is not like the Pilgrims or anything like that, but this becomes very much the look at Indonesia as literally a factory for the production of spices, okay? And that model is going to continue, in the Americas, okay? The British, of course, will end up primarily in India, and they are going to gain some permission of what is at the time a very powerful empire. We'll spend a little bit of time with the Mughal Empire, kind of a Turkish, Mongol-related group that had been dominating India in this time, but the power of the corporation and the military behind it is really what's driving some of the expansion of the British in India. And this will happen over a long period of time, and we see really important consequences as a result of this. So that's kind of important to note. As a whole, right, you have the Europeans becoming much more politically influential, militarily influential in the area of Asia. There is also rejection of this. We're going to see rejection by a lot of the indigenous populations. So there's conflict that ensues as a result of this, even in places where it was, invited, conflict ensues. Okay. How